Hey, this is Sabrina Monarch of Monarch Astrology, bringing you the astrology forecast for September 9th to September 15th, 2020. And we have Mars stationing retrograde, which is a big deal. The Mars retrograde will affect the rest of 2020. Mars will be squaring Saturn and Pluto and Jupiter most of the time as well of the rest of 2020. So real quick, before we get into this, I'm Sabrina Monarch. I have been writing these forecasts at monarchastrology.com for years. I'm on my 6th year now. I'm a clairvoyant, and I write these forecasts with the intention to help uplift you and illuminate subtle opportunities, as well as to give you insight for how to navigate some of the challenges that may be arising. So I'm going to share my screen. I write these forecasts and share them to monarchastrology.com. And I recently branched out to YouTube to bring you video versions as well. So in the last week, leading up to this event of this Mars retrograde, which we'll be exploring at some depth today, I had a few synchronistic encounters with Mars, which makes me all the more excited to share this forecast with you. I've truly been thinking about this transit for months. The other night at my desk, the one I'm sitting at now, and like you can kind of see me in this picture, the blinds were drawn, so I hadn't pulled them up yet. I had this sudden but very soft understanding of how I've already been feeling this retrograde approaching and how the Mars retrograde ceremony has already begun. We've been in pre-shadow. For me, it has taken the form of writing in a journal more frequently again and being more honest with myself about fears and impasses that I sense, conflicts that are coming up, and outcomes that I desire. And being diligent to pray for support, allowing these spaces of the unknown to be openings. As the situations unfold, I watch more graceful outcomes emerge that appear to not just be my own, but to be some kind of co-creation. And in this slowing down and contemplating an action or course of action, I felt my heart open with the thought of Mars. And I looked up, and right outside my window, like in between the slits of the blinds, I saw this red twinkling light and knew it was Mars. And then on Saturday night, and I write these forecasts during the day on Saturday. So Saturday night, as I was thinking about this forecast and about Mars specifically, I was walking back to my car, specifically thinking about Mars, when I passed a man who said to his group of friends, "That one is Mars." And I looked up to where he was pointing, and there was Mars, so beautifully visible next to the moon. You may have been noticing that red star right next to the moon lately, though of course they will be growing farther apart, that red star and the moon. But they were conjunct when the moon was in Aries. And of course, this is not a real depiction of what Mars looks like next to the moon, because Mars would look like a star and not so big. If you're listening to an audio-only version of this, this is a picture of the moon and Mars next to each other, and they're around the same size in the picture, which is not how it would appear. So the reason that I have thought so carefully about this retrograde is that for all the Mars retrogrades I've consciously observed since 2014, I've felt Mars retrograde to be a challenging transit, if not also catalyzing. Mars relates to courage and the challenge, so I like a good lay of the land for entering Mars retrograde season so I can be more intentional and more self-accurate, and that's what I want to share with you, these insights to help you do the same. I've known a fair bit of Mars retrograde, natal Mars retrograde individuals, by the way, who are personal trainers or athletic teachers of some kind, and they're so aware and so able to express these micro facets of the craft of whatever they are teaching, whether that's dance or aerial or personal training or yoga. It's really amazing. And they're the ones living out Mars retrograde, so they're being very deeply intentional about Martian activities. But in this forecast, I've detailed some of the tensions that can be up with this transit. So Mars retrograde as an energy in the collective, but also advice for how to work with the opportunities of the moment. So before we get into the forecast, I have a few announcements. One is that I have a new episode of Magic of the Spheres, my podcast, out with Daniela Gill, and we talked about the Mars retrograde, and Daniela opened the Akashic records for this discussion. This episode is full of transmissions, and I'm really excited to share it with you. And then in other news, my astrology reading books are full. I'm booked out for astrology readings at the moment, but I am still accepting clients for mentorship, which is a 6-month or 1-year commitment. And if you're interested in working with me in a longer term capacity, you can send me an email at sabrina@monarchastrology.com. And then my other piece of news is that I will be announcing the dates for the next Evolutionary Astrology Intensive sooner than I usually do so that you have time to plan for it. And I'm also planning on making this one friendlier to European time zones. Okay, here's our week. So on September 9th, 2020, the Sun in 17 degrees of Virgo will trine Jupiter retrograde in 17 degrees of Capricorn. Sun-Jupiter contacts can relate to happiness and boosted confidence. You have, the solar archetype, which is radiance, and Jupiter, which expands what it touches. But with the planets in these two signs, particularly Virgo and Capricorn, this boost might come from fulfilling necessary tasks that are not necessarily glamorous, but relate to maintaining a functioning life. Which is interesting, by the way. My car is still a mess. It's like one of the places I've been procrastinating getting organized. And last night I was rummaging through it to find something, and I had a dream this morning of cleaning my car, and it was such a joyful feeling tone in the dream, and the car felt so good that I actually do have plans to clean the car today as another way also to build an anchor of a connection between my dream world and this one. Anyway, Jupiter has some correspondence to Ganesha, and Ganesha helps with clearing obstacles. Inside of necessary chores and life-maintaining activities and to-do list items may be a surprising reserve of happiness and esteem. Especially when we take on tasks we have been avoiding, we clear a lot of energy in our lives. I speak from awareness personally, but I also think that it is an energetic feature of our experience that when we take care of whatever we've been procrastinating and avoiding, it really does clear up some space. On the other hand, if our experience is currently dominated with monotony or delayed gratification in the service of a farther, loftier out goal, and we've already been, putting off really pleasure and fun and enjoyment and doing all these little micro tasks, which there's always more. You always have to keep cleaning. There will always be another mess. So it would be a good time to actually engage those activities that support happiness and positive mental health, especially for those of you that are prone to delaying gratification in life. Such a weird way to put it, as in you just overwork is another way to say it. So Mars retrograde, Mars stations retrograde in 28 degrees of Aries at 3:22 p.m. Pacific, a nice angel number. And Mars will square Pluto and Saturn for the rest of the year due to this retrograde. And it'll square Jupiter and Capricorn most of the retrograde as well. Mars stations direct on November 13th, 2020 in 15 degrees of Aries and leaves retrograde shadow January 2nd, 2021. So it's effectively influencing the rest of 2020. Similar to how Venus retrogrades bring in heightened Venusian experiences of relationship and discord alike and can relate to journeys of the heart, Mars retrogrades can be journeys of the solar plexus, the personal will, and courage. Mars retrogrades can constellate activating, catalyzing situations where we find ourselves having to choose a course of action, perhaps within an impasse that we've not quite experienced before. In the midst of a novel conflict or a novel activation, it's like slow motion when we find ourselves in these situations. With Mars and Aries squaring the Capricorn planets, so Saturn and Pluto, and sometimes Jupiter, depending on how close Mars gets to earlier in Aries, there's a major emphasis on slowing down and sinking into a deeper intentionality with our actions. So, question for you: what is the difference to you between inhibition, caution, and wisdom? They have a similar energy archetypally with Mars or Saturn or Aries and Capricorn, but it's a different gradient, right, between inhibition, caution, and wisdom. We can find, it's tricky sometimes too, because if we just are always cautious, there can be consequences that come from not acting, in the same way that there can be consequences coming from acting too rashly. So sometimes we do have to make choices and not just delay the making of choices. So an impasses are by definition a situation in which no progress is possible, especially because of a disagreement, a deadlock. This is from Oxford. If you look back to previous impasses in your life, often it rerouted your course. At worst, it felt like a defeat. And at best, there was a paradigm shift that made the original impasse irrelevant and opened up a whole new course that felt more authentic and more valuable to you. So the reroute, when we think about Capricorn or Saturn, there's boundaries and limitations, and Mars and Aries just wants to push past or go forward or be completely unfettered and unhindered from pursuing complete autonomy and freedom. So when we're aiming for something and we keep hitting a wall, we can try harder to get through the wall, or we can reroute. So there's that energy of how sometimes when we get a no in life, it reroutes our path. And it takes discernment to know when we need to move through an obstacle or find a way over a hurdle versus when it's not our hurdle to overcome. And there's an archetypal tension within this transit between establishment and tradition, or the old, and a fresh burst of life and instinct. I like the idea of a dragon hatching from an egg, because it's not just that Aries and Capricorn, for example, are clearly defined camps. When you have Mars, or really any planet, in aspect to another planet, the planets interpenetrate each other. So there's a sense of each archetype fusing with the other. So I think of reptiles, or even fictional reptiles, as having some energy to do with Pluto, definitely, and also Capricorn, even what's old, what's ancient. There's something very ancient and primordial about reptiles, and the egg is this structure that houses a being for a time, and then there's this cracking through the egg, and this little like new life cracking through the structure, the sense of Aries and Mars, or Mars and Aries wanting to push through obstacles, and the limitations or the boundaries being the structures, right? So hatching from an egg is, to me, a really good image to think about this tension between Capricorn and Aries. But this archetypal tension between establishment, tradition, and the old versus a fresh burst of life and instinct. So think about that one, because it's going to be everywhere. At times, the disagreement is warlike. Establishment wants to quell the new. It's like, settle down. Or the new wants to destroy the establishment. At this level of intense disagreement, there is often lack of understanding and even developmental blocks from understanding each other. And by that, I mean what is established is too crystallized, too formed to be flexible. There's a rigidity that comes with having existed for a long time, whether we are talking about people or society or institutions. And what is new can be too immature to understand the full depth of the situation. And of course, these two, they're so linked because the old has literally given birth to the new. And the new has all these new codes, these new offerings, this freshness to offer the system. But the new is also a product of the system. So there's this dynamic really that holds these two together, even if they may have very different agendas or be working at cross purposes at times. On the other hand, this archetypal tension between old and new can be very fruitful. The new energy comes into maturity within the container of the world that has already been built and established. Sometimes the youth and the elders have immensely respectful relationships to each other and feel enhanced by the other, and they're truly in relationship with each other. These archetypal frictions between old and new challenge what is old or established to become more clear about where standing ground is necessary and where flexibility is needed. The long established energies can be bothered by being challenged so recklessly as it would appear. Now, if there are places in our lives where we possess a certain amount of authority or expertise, or we have worked hard and climbed to attain a position in life, we may find ourselves playing the Capricorn or the establishment energy in this dynamic. It could be a social position of power. And that could be one that has been earned or one that has been inherited, such as by privilege, or one, that has been directly kind of like got out into the world and sought for, or some mixture of both, some intersectional mixture of both. But it also could be a well-maintained sense of personal integrity. So this sense of having clearly defined ourselves over time through consistent action that reflects our moral compass or something like that. So if we are playing Capricorn, if we're in this established position, then Mars in Aries is squaring us. Rather than being shocked at being challenged, we might come to expect that our position will be challenged. The question is how skillfully and perhaps even playfully we can work with this resistance. Be mindful of sparring occurring in your environment between the old and the new, elders and youth, traditional values and rebellion to those values, authority and recklessness, the experienced and the initiates. Now, it's not always so clearly black and white. There is that interpenetration or that interpenetration of archetypes. So you can have the aggression of the old, like this is the way it is, and that kind of Martian force. Or you could have the inhibition and the caution and the kind of stodginess of the youth. Like these things can be, they can flow in between the different archetypes. So it's not going to be black and white necessarily. The more black and white it is, the more kind of divisive it tends to be, but often these things are more fluidly flowing through each other, if you catch my meaning. So this dynamic between old and new, between establishment and new developments in society, this is rich and human. It's been playing out archetypally for as long as we've been organizing in society. You can find it in books, movies, and your own family systems. This sense of the passing of the torch, the passing of power and authority in the family, the coming of age of the youth, and the little or big power battles that occur between generations, and definitely in the collective, the power battles politically that occur between generations, etc. This deeply archetypal part of the fabric of our reality, and this being a place of tension for the rest of the year. This archetypal tension challenges what is new and instinctual and or impulsive to find an efficacious, so an effectual course of action that is more responsible and more aware than it is impatient or foolish. Or to be willing at least to accept the consequences of foolishness, to learn through trial and error and feedback. And perhaps there's even some developmental necessity to test life and one's abilities and to learn what happens. So it's interesting, the advice of like, well, don't be a fool. It's funny because if you are new and you're naive or you are just learning something, of course, you're probably going to make some mistakes and learn from those mistakes. So there can be a sense of necessity within the fool archetype to go out into the world to try things and to test oneself against the environment. There is a difference, though, when we're doing something that we already kind of know better, when we already have the insight or the wisdom and we just are like, fuck it, and we try the thing anyway and have the consequence that we knew was going to happen. There's a difference between true innocence and true newness, and that desire to be imprinted by the world, to go out and to try and to see what happens. And of course, when I was writing this and thinking even of the words fool and foolishness, it struck me as so Aries Capricorn. There's already such judgment, potentially. Like the fool can be a very neutral archetype, but foolishness is such a judgmental word. So I really sat with that and I couldn't find a better word. So when I thought about it, archetypally, one who is fresh and new and unaware of the path before them is a fool. It's like the first card in the major arcana of the tarot. The fool often finds support and luck, as well as lessons, which lessons can mean, hardship or learning through trial and error. Or it can mean rewards and like gold stars. Lessons in life that are feedback from one's actions. One at the onset of a new journey has to have some reserve of courage or naivete or a mix of both to set off on some journey. Often this courage is rewarded, and a repetitive or consistent willingness to try new things and to get back up is a kind of strength that is represented at the intersection of Aries and Capricorn energy. Because if you're just trying to do the right thing all the time and make sure that you're perfect and you fit in the box and you never make a mistake, there's a sense of not like taking the fool's leap. And sometimes it is that leap that is the greatest reward. It's a tension, right? It's an archetypal tension. And so the fool or the fresh initiate or the new one, these characters may have less experience, but they're also less crystallized in their perception and potentially less jaded by life. The perspective they bring is truly fresh, and it can challenge or invigorate or a mix of both the status quo. And these tense dynamics that we've explored that I keep calling tense and keep alluding to their friction because we are talking about a square. These dynamics exist within intergenerational discord, conservatism versus progress, as well as within the self's competing impulses for maintaining the status quo versus breaking it. It is also the self's competing impulses for new adventure versus staying in the known. And whether we give ourselves permission and support for learning new things or feel too inhibited to do so, or if we shame ourselves very hard for making mistakes, like these are all Aries Capricorn energies. Remember that planetary transits occur across people relationally, but also represents aspects of ourselves. And these dynamics can be found in many places and will be a fabric that you may notice in your environment or in world events or in your psyche throughout the rest of 2020. So I invite you to consider the radical, evolutionary, or revelatory opportunities available when these archetypal tensions collaborate and teach one another more than they war with one another, and what this could look like in your own life. And part of this is really working with the projections that come from when we are on a very clearly defined camp, like I'm the establishment, you are the ignorant, or you're the old and you don't like understand life anymore. And like this kind of sense of I'm right, you are wrong divisiveness. And that it's so, I keep saying the word archetypal, but in a lot of different adventure quest stories, there is that sense of the establishment, the order, and the hero who separates from that and comes back. And that process of coming back, that process of integrating, there can be resistance. There can be a desire for the youth to bend the old, like stop being so rigid, and the old feeling challenged by the youth, or feeling proud of them, or like, we're happy that you're inheriting the world, you'll do so good with it. Like there's an exchange of power and a very complex and intricate relationship within these archetypes. And a last note about this retrograde for now, I believe that one of the highest expressions of the warrior is the peacemaker, one who understands war, and because they truly respect the damage that war causes, they work to create peace instead at every possible opportunity. This is an alchemical warrior. When we find more skillful ways of resolving conflict or negotiating agreements, or learning how to opt out of inner violence, so what sows violence within us that then ripples out into the world, we support a more peaceful planet when we work to transform and transmute wherever violence lives inside of us. So peace moves. It is a power, and it takes courage and nobility. Mars forever just feels like such a complex archetype. I mean, on the one hand, it can be simple, brute violence, but it's also the question of how do we stand up for ourselves? How do we, what does anger mean when we feel it? What's our relationship with anger? And there are some people who don't really value the experience of anger within themselves, so they don't let themselves feel it, or they repress it, and they may have more issue with feeling walked over by others or experiencing situations that they don't like, and they keep being in those same situations. So anger can be a catalyst for change. But then there are people who run hot, and they're defensive, and they're angry, and they create drama and conflict in their life through their aggression. So Mars is like fire. And how we wield fire is a delicate, skillful process. So then on September 11th, 2020, the sun in 19 degrees of Virgo will oppose Neptune retrograde in 19 degrees of Pisces at 1:26 p.m. Pacific. The Virgo-Pisces axis relates to the connection of heaven and earth, and the magic that we can experience through ordinary life, quote, ordinary life, and ways that we can blur the lines between heaven and earth, or magic and reality, so that these are not so starkly separate realities. It's only the mind and mental habit that makes it so, but how can we blur those boundaries again? One way that this can be done is through accepting and forgiving life as it is, and loosening our grip on needing to make things problems. It is still possible to refine and improve reality from a place of love and acceptance rather than fear and control. Another way that this can be done, this blending of heaven and earth, is through ritual prayer or sparkling up mundane daily life moments. One of my rediscovered inspirations of late, which I actually mentioned in the podcast episode with Daniela, because Daniela is responsible for this newfound inspiration, is praying over food and infusing the food with vitality, love, abundance, pleasure, etc., and really feeling those intentions in my heart as I speak them. So when I start my day and I make a prayer for how the day is going to go, or I imagine a situation that's coming up in the future and I make a prayer about it, or I set an intention before I get on the phone with someone, or I pray over my food, like when you take these little transitional moments throughout the day of entering an activity and you infuse it with some kind of magic through your intention, then you are helping build that bridge between heaven and earth. Another beautiful way is like herbalists, like people that make potions or salves. Like there's the physical quality of the plant, but there's also the herbalist's relationship with that plant and the herbalist's kind of sense of magic that they are infusing to the physical products that they make. And then within this transit of Sun in Virgo opposite Neptune in Pisces, there is potential for feelings of divine discontent this week, which can be a signal that more connection is desired, and it can happen through those very simple channels that I was just describing. As much as we want life to do something for us or to impress us in some way, we also have to create our own magic, and this can be done in small, basic moments with a little intention and heart. So I offer a prayer for everyone who's watching this for you to feel re-enchanted in your experience this week and onward. And not about enchantment, but kind of like the opposite of it. But, you know, I always reroute it back to enchantment. September 12th, 2020, Jupiter stations direct in 17 degrees of Capricorn and 5:41 p.m. So if you haven't caught on throughout the forecasts, or if you follow other astrologers and whatnot, Jupiter in Capricorn is a little bit of a gritty placement because Jupiter expands and Capricorn is about limitations and sometimes can have an energy of cynicism. In traditional astrology, Capricorn is in its fall or Jupiter's in its fall in Capricorn. And I'm studying Hellenistic astrology at such a baby level. Evolutionary astrology is the tradition that I come from, which does not use these labels of detriment or exaltation or any of that. But I have sympathized with that concept and thinking about Jupiter in Capricorn, where Jupiter is all about expansion and travel, and Capricorn is about limitations. And so there can be a sense of feeling expanded through our boundaries, like setting better boundaries, saying no, and feeling the yes that comes from that. There can be a sense of working more, Jupiter more in Capricorn. There can be a sense of esteem and kind of joy that comes through being in right relationship with the responsibility in our lives. But there can also just be so much cynicism and so much pessimism at such a exaggerated level with Jupiter and Capricorn. And so while Jupiter stations direct, planets that station become very loud energies in the sky. So Jupiter and Capricorn may be more felt. So here's some of my thoughts on it for you this week. There can be a gravity or a seriousness in the air, or personal and collective sense of doubt and pessimism and uncertainty. An invitation to be mindful to not believe these feelings at face values, because it runs the risk of being unchecked, half-baked philosophy. Reality does not just belong to the pessimists who, quote, see it how it is. Pessimism is a highly exaggerated and tinted perspective. It is taking reality with a meta story of things being negative or inherently bad, or inherently meaningless, like we're just on a rock hurling around a meaningless sun, you know, like that is taking features of experience or of reality and tinting them towards this negative or nihilistic perspective. And like any focus we have magnetizes its own evidence and validation. So often people that are very pessimistic keep finding reasons to be pessimistic. And faith and optimism and hope can be a portal for miracles to happen or for new and unknown things to happen. So if you already don't believe that those things are possible, then you severely limit your worldview and the possibilities that can come your way. However, Jupiter works magic with exaggeration. It's often a full expression of an emotion that helps move the energy. When we make space for our grief, it can heal us. If we feel an inflated, extreme sense of depression, we could be on the precipice of a breakthrough. If we have a more dramatic emotional mood, what would it mean to believe, not to believe it, but to ask what its ceremony is, to indulge in the ceremony of it and then move on? So for me, part of this is inspired by an experience I had recently of feeling like I like to come back to positive mental states, uplift my mood, live a magical and enchanted life. But the other week I was having this mood, like I just felt really bad and I couldn't pull myself out of it. And because it felt so hard to pull myself out of it, I just gave into it. Like I surrendered into it and I went to bed early. And as I was falling asleep, or not really falling asleep because I wasn't tired yet, I just felt emotionally defeated. I felt like an egg cracking. This belief or this idea I'd had about reality for years was shown to me in a vision cracking. And I could see this like fractal of like how it played out in all these different ways in my life. And then I felt this burst of energy and like life had returned to me. But it was in that descent of just fully giving into that depressive moment that the wisdom broke through. So it's interesting. Like, I don't know. I don't think there's a one size fits all. Like for me, I really do have a discipline or a committed value to coming back again and again to elevated states of consciousness and love and playfulness and joy and whatnot. But there are these times to go into the descent, and sometimes there's a soulful wisdom in that. And I think that the soul likes drama. I think it does. So Jupiter stationing in Capricorn, I'm sensing into some kind of inflated or exaggerated sense of the Capricorn archetype, which can be that extreme pessimism, but does that make way for some kind of a breakthrough? What's your relationship to that tide of pessimism if it comes up? Maybe it won't, maybe it will, I don't know. So our next transit, September 14th, 2020, the sun in 22 degrees of Virgo will trine Pluto retrograde in 22 degrees of Capricorn at 4:09 p.m. Pacific. And I didn't write about that one. It's a little bit similar to the sun in Virgo trining Jupiter in Capricorn, but it's Pluto in Capricorn. So similar theme around, the Virgo and Capricorn harmony. And maybe about some of this kind of space clearing or purification energy this week. But then on September 15th, 2020, Venus in 10 degrees of Leo will square Uranus retrograde in 10 degrees of Taurus at 8:29 a.m. Pacific. And while many of this week's transits have a more sobering energy, Capricorn planets involved, this is party energy, Venus-Uranus. Venus-Uranus puts us in touch with a desire to connect with new people or to connect in new ways, to experiment with fashion and appearance, or more psycho-spiritually this transit, how to up-level our relationships and break through stagnant patterns that we have in love and friendship. There may also be some activation here around self-sourcing confidence and finding power from within, and seeing how doing that often magnetizes external gratification, validation, but it was internally generated. So by that, how you define yourself, how you feel about yourself, how you love yourself gets reflected to you from the outside. And it's very interesting how powerful that inner magnetism can be. So the freedom to be confident, the freedom to feel luxurious and beautiful, the liberation of feeling worthy, these are all themes up this week. We may hold beliefs of what we need to feel these ways, but some of these needs are things we don't have. So we set ourselves up to sit just outside of paradise, on the outside looking in, thinking, if only I had the money, the looks, the partner, the house, whatever that symbol is. There has to be another way, no? A way to feel beautiful, luxurious, or wealthy unconditionally. This week may ask us to loosen our grip on our preconceived notions and conditions of how we are allowed to feel this way, what grants us permission, and to discover some more inherent inner worthiness based on what we have, based on who we are. And not what we have in terms of physical possessions, maybe at one level of it, if that offers you some kind of nourishment, but thinking about what you have internally that is more eternal, that is more more natural to you, part of you. Even if these things come and go and are in a flow, in a sense. It's not that you possess these things eternally, but thinking about what you are, what you can turn on by virtue of your intention. When we work with this inherent inner worthiness, we can radiate that through our being and into our environment instead of needing to get it from the outside. So just the mystery of magnetism and playing with that this week. This is what I have for you. I invite you, I forgot to say at the beginning, please like this video, subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell, sign up for my mailing list. This is going to be the best way to stay in touch with me and to learn about my upcoming course offerings, when my books open back up, and to get the weekly forecast delivered to your inbox every week. You can find me on Instagram at Sabrina Monarch. The forecasts come out every week at monarchastrology.com and most weeks here on YouTube. I hope that you have a beautiful week and that this video helps you not just this week, but as something for the rest of the year, because this Mars retrograde energy is here for the rest of 2020. Even though Mars will station direct in November, we're going to be in shadow, post-retrograde shadow, and we'll also still have that Mars, Saturn, Pluto energy happening for the rest of the year. Do check out that podcast episode with Daniela Gill because we talked more about these themes, and I'll catch you next time.